History is not a straight road.
It's a path paved with chances narrow, fragile, and uncertain. Every war, every battle, every decision
Could have gone the other way. A missed radio call, a fog that lingered too long, a bullet that struck 2 inches higher, each moment a fork in history. World War II, the most catastrophic conflict in human history, was not destined to end the way it did. For every Allied victory, there was a breathless moment when defeat seemed inevitable. But
what if that defeat had happened? What if the Axis powers Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan had prevailed?
what kind of world would we live in today? Imagine a London draped in swastikas, a Europe where resistance whispers in the dark, a Pacific where the rising sun never sets. These are not fantasies of fiction.
They are the nightmares that almost became reality. Historians call them tipping points, moments where a single thread could unravel the entire fabric of our world. What if the Blitz had crushed Britain?
What if D-Day had failed?
What if Stalin's Red Army had collapsed before Moscow? And what if America, disheartened and divided, had stayed out of the war entirely? Each of these what ifs leads us down a darker road, one where tyranny wins and freedom fades into memory. This is not fantasy. This is history's shadow, a mirror of what might have been. And in that mirror, we see not just the horror of an alternate world, but the courage of the real one.
Because every victory we remember was once a moment of terror that could have gone the other way.
And every freedom we enjoy was won by people who refused to let the nightmare come true. In this journey, we'll step across those fragile turning points to see the world if history had broken differently.
A world that could have been. A world that almost was.
If you believe history is fragile and worth remembering, subscribe to this channel. Because in the next chapter, we explore the Blitz that never ended and the chilling reality of a Britain that fell under Nazi rule.
London, 1940.
In our world, the Blitz was a test of endurance.
57 consecutive nights of fire, rubble, and courage.
But in this alternate history, the test never ended because the Blitz worked. Imagine this. September 1940, the Luftwaffe changes tactics.
Instead of dividing its strength between airfields and cities, it doubles down night and day on London.
The bombs don't let up.
Factories collapse. Fuel depots burn. And this time, the Royal Air Force can't recover. By October, the skies belong to Germany. Radar stations are gone. Fighter command is crippled. And Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's long-feared invasion of Britain, begins.
In our real history, the English Channel stood as a moat against tyranny. But in this version, the fog is heavy, the tides are right, and the British Navy is scattered.
Within weeks, the first Wehrmacht units reach the southern counties. Folkestone falls, then Dover. By November, London is surrounded.
The government flees to Canada. King George VI escapes aboard HMS Renown.
And Winston Churchill, defiant to the end, refuses evacuation. Churchill, archival tone, reimagined. If we must perish,
let it be as lions, not as lambs led to slaughter. He broadcasts one last message before London falls silent.
It is never heard again.
Nazi troops march through Whitehall.
The Union Jack is torn from Buckingham Palace.
A swastika rises in its place. The occupation begins taught in schools. Children learn the new order. Posters of Hitler replace portraits of the king.
Jews, resistors, and former soldiers are rounded up and sent to detention camps outside Birmingham. The BBC, once the voice of defiance, now broadcasts propaganda in clipped, obedient tones.
Even Big Ben stops chiming. Silenced after a bombing raid, leaves its tower cracked.
To the outside world, Britain is gone. The United States now alone hesitates. Canada becomes a government in exile, but without an island fortress across the Atlantic. Even America's hope begins to fade.
In this world, freedom dies not with an explosion, but with silence. No Churchill speeches, no IF aces.
Only whispers in dark basements of men and women who refuse to forget what the Union Jack once stood for. They call themselves the London Underground, not of tunnels, but of rebellion.
Their weapons are typewriters, hidden radios, and courage, and though their stories are brief, they keep the embers alive. But across the Channel, in France, in Norway, and beyond, Hitler's empire stands unchallenged. The Allies are broken. The next great battle for freedom must come from across the sea. In the next chapter, we ask,
what if D-Day never came? What if the greatest gamble of the war was lost before it began? If this vision of a conquered Britain shook you, imagine the horror of D-Day's failure.
Subscribe and join us for part 3, Operation Overlord, D-Day repelled, June 6, 1944.
In our history, this was the day the tide turned. The day thousands of men stormed the beaches of Normandy, beginning the liberation of Europe. But in this alternate history, the sea becomes their grave. It begins with weather of force beyond strategy or courage.
A stronger storm than expected.
Winds tearing through the channel. Visibility drops to nothing.
General Eisenhower hesitates.
But pushes forward. He cannot afford another delay.
But across the coast, German radar stations detect the fleet early. Rommel, who in our world was away visiting his wife, happens to be there, inspecting defenses.
He acts fast.
Within hours, the Atlantic wall awakens.
Batteries from Calais to Cherbourg thunder into life. The element of surprise gone.
The deception of Operation Fortitude exposed.
At Omaha Beach, the first wave never makes it past the surf.
Bodies drift in the tide. Communications break down. Airborne divisions scattered by the wind. Land miles of course straight into waiting German patrols. By noon, the beaches are chaos. The Allies have no foothold, no command, no path forward. The dream of liberation begins to drown beneath the waves.
Reports flood in. Utah contained. Gold annihilated. Omaha
Gone. Eisenhower is silent. He reaches for his pen and writes the note he never had to send in our world. Our landings in the Cherbourg Le Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold. I have withdrawn the troops. The fleet retreats.
Tens of thousands are lost.
The greatest amphibious invasion in history shattered in a single day.
In Berlin, Hitler declares Wunderbar Nachrichten, wonderful news.
Goebbels calls it the Day of Destiny.
Europe, he says, is safe.
France remains enslaved. The Vichy regime is strengthened. The resistance, hunted down with brutal precision across the Atlantic. Roosevelt faces a storm of his own.
American confidence collapses overnight. Congress questions the war itself. Families mourn without bodies to bury. WWII autumn. The US shifts its focus entirely to the Pacific.
Europe for now is abandoned, and in the ruins of Normandy, the dead wash ashore for weeks.
Small crosses line the sand, silent witnesses to what could have been victory.
Without Dday, there is no march to Paris.
No liberation of Belgium.
No meeting at Elba. The Iron Cross still affilies over Europe. But in the east, another front begins to falter.
Because without allied pressure from the west, the Red Army must face the full fury of the Wehrmacht alone. Next, we travel east to the blood-soaked fields of Russia.
And ask, what if the Soviet Union had fallen? What if the last hope of Europe had frozen to death on the Eastern Front?
If this vision of Dday's failure struck you, share this story.
Winter, the great defender of Russia.
In our history, it stopped Napoleon.
And later, Hitler. But in this darker timeline, the frost does not save them. It kills them.
It is December 1941.
In our world, the Red Army stood its ground at Moscow.
But in this world, the German spearheads never halted. A milder autumn, clearer skies, and extended supply lines give the Wehrmacht what it needed most. Momentum. Panzer divisions slice through the Soviet front like knives through cloth.
By Christmas, the swastika FLIs over the Kremlin.
Stalin vanishes rumored dead, or fled beyond the Urals.
Moscow burns, and with it, the Soviet heart.
Hitler announces Operation Sonnenaufgang Sunrise.
The conquest of European Russia. Millions are captured. Entire cities are erased from maps. In the West, Allied governments are paralyzed. The failed D-Day invasion has broken their strength. Now, without a second front, the Wehrmacht turns its full power eastward, an unstoppable storm.
Resistance collapses. Factories fall silent.
The red banner torn from rooftops is replaced by the black eagle of the Reich.
And with Moscow gone, the Soviet Union fractures.
Local commanders carve out fiefdoms. Some surrender, others turn to banditry.
By 1943, the Russian heartland is a wasteland of famine, executions, and ghosts. The Nazi vision of the Ostland, once theoretical, now takes shape.
Ukraine, Belarus, and Western Russia are absorbed into the Greater Reich. Millions are deported for forced labor.
Millions more exterminated.
In this world, there is no Stalingrad to turn the tide, no Kursk to hold the line.
The factories of the Urals never rise again, and the cities that once fed the Soviet machine become silent memorials to a failed resistance. By 1944, Europe belongs to Hitler.
From the Pyrenees to the Volga, his empire stretches unbroken, the greatest tyranny the world has ever known. Berlin becomes the new Rome, its streets rebuilt in stone and steel. A 1,000-year empire, no longer a dream, but a living nightmare.
And in the East, where once the Soviet star burned bright, only ashes remain.
The last partisans hide in Siberia, hunted by dogs, aircraft, and winter itself.
There is no hope of liberation.
Only survival. And far across the ocean, America listens horrified, isolated, uncertain.
Its allies gone, its enemies victorious.
The question is no longer how to win the war,
but whether to continue it at all. Next,
we turn west.
to a world where America, beaten by fear and distance, retreats behind its oceans while the Axis divide the world between them.
If the fall of the Soviet Union chills you, the next chapter will haunt you. Join us for the next part, the American isolation the world abandoned. Across the Atlantic, the lights of Europe have gone out. The Blitz succeeded.
D-Day failed.
The Soviet Union collapsed, and now the United States stands alone. In this alternate 1945, the arsenal of democracy becomes a fortress instead. The dream of saving the world dies in the smoke of Normandy and the snows of Moscow.
Congress, weary of loss, passes the Continental Defense Act. American troops are recalled from foreign theaters.
Isolationism, the old ghost of the 1930s, returns in triumph. Across the nation, fear disguises itself as peace.
Factories retool for domestic life. Victory gardens grow where war bonds once sold. And on the airwaves, new voices preach comfort over courage. Roosevelt's health falters under pressure. He does not seek another term.
In his place rises a new president, one promising peace with strength. A nation exhausted chooses retreat.
But peace built on denial is fragile. The oceans no longer protect America as they once did.
Because beyond those waves, the Axis powers are rewriting the world.
In Berlin, Hitler's empire stretches from France to Siberia. In Tokyo, Emperor Hirohito reigns over an Asian empire spanning from India to Hawaii.
And between them, the Pacific becomes a frontier of fear.
By 1946, Japan controls the Philippines, Australia, and the South Pacific.
Its fleets patrol the west coast with silent confidence. Los Angeles, San Francisco cities, once glittering with promise, now dig coastal trenches in preparation for invasion.
The American Navy is vast, but spread thin. Its morale
uncertain. Without allies, every battle is a battle alone. Propaganda floods the airwaves.
Stay vigilant, says one poster. Beware of spies, warns another. Fear replaces unity.
Suspicion replaces hope.
And yet, beneath the silence of isolation, there are still voices that whisper of duty, of unfinished wars. They are soldiers, journalists, refugees, men and women who cannot forget the allies left behind. They form secret groups urging America not to turn away from the world's suffering. Their leaflets read, "Freedom doesn't end at the shoreline," but their voices are drowned out by exhaustion and fear.
The never again generation becomes the not our war generation. WWII 1948. The new world map is complete. Half the planet FLIs the flags of fascism, and the other half watches, doing nothing. For the first time, the United States looks outward and sees not allies, but empires.
The torch of liberty it once held so high
now flickers.
Next, we explore the world beyond America's shores, a world conquered, reshaped, and rewritten under tyranny. A world where ordinary people must live beneath the weight of empire.
This is the occupied world. If you've followed this far into the nightmare, don't look away now. Join us fourth upcoming part. The occupied world life under the new order. Imagine a world where the war ended not with peace,
but with surrender.
Where the victors wrote not only the history books, but the future.
It is 1952.
The Axis powers have divided the globe.
Germany rules Europe.
Japan dominates Asia, and between them lies a quiet ocean, a boundary between two empires built on fear.
Berlin now Germania.
The vision of Albert Speer realized. Colossal halls, 10,000 pillars, an eternal parade ground. Citizens march in perfect rhythm. Every child salutes the flag before breakfast. Every window glows with portraits of the FHR.
It is a world that runs on order and silence.
Books deemed degenerate have been erased. Entire generations grow up never knowing words like democracy or freedom.
In classrooms from Paris to Warsaw, history begins in 1939. Teachers tell children, the war was necessary.
The Reich saved the world from chaos. But beneath the polished streets, beneath the propaganda,
there is another world.
In the ruins of old cathedrals, priests hold forbidden masses. In the basements of burned-out houses, families hide band radios tuning into static, hoping to hear a voice from the free world that no longer exists.
They are ghosts of the old world, remind us that truth still breathes, even when it whispers.
Across the empire, everything is catalogued. Citizens carry identification cards.
Surveillance networks track letters, movements, friendships.
The Ministry of Culture decides what people dream of. The Ministry of Peace decides who lives long enough to enjoy it.
And in the east, the conquered lands suffer most.
Ukraine, Poland, and Western Russia have become colonies renamed the agricultural zones. Entire populations reduced to labor quotas.
Children sent to German families for re-education. Generations grow up believing this is how the world has always been. No war,
No freedom, just obedience. But even in the heart of the machine in the cities of glass and steel, cracks begin to form.
rumors of resistance circulate like forbidden poetry.
Graffiti appears overnight, a single word. Hope across the globe. Hidden movements awaken. In Tokyo, students distribute leaflets calling for democracy.
In Berlin, factory workers sabotage production lines.
In Paris, the old tricolor appears for one night, painted on a wall, before being washed away by morning rain.
It is dangerous to dream.
But the human spirit dreams anyway. And as the 1950s give way to the 60s,
Whispers become rumors,
rumors become networks, and networks.
become movements.
Even in a world of total victory, the victors begin to fear the one enemy. It cannot defeat memory. Next, we descend into those shadows to meet the forgotten souls who refuse to bow.
The brave, the hunted, the invisible, the resistance that lives not in armies, but in hearts. If this glimpse into a conquered world moved, you don't miss the next chapter. Resistance in the shadows.
Subscribe and keep the flame of history alive. Empires can conquer nations,
They can erase borders, rewrite books.
even silence voices, but they cannot kill an idea. In the world that followed the Axis victory, defiance became an act of faith.
From the snows of Norway to the rice fields of Manchuria, whispers of rebellion echoed underground.
This is the story of those who refused to kneel. They called themselves the Shadows, networks of forgotten soldiers, escaped prisoners, and ordinary citizens bound not by hope of victory.
But by the refusal to live without it.
Their weapons were not tanks or planes, but words, songs, and silence.
In Berlin, a typist named Anna risked her life to print a single leaflet. Truth cannot die. In Kyoto, a student's notebook was filled not with lessons, but with forbidden poetry.
In the ruins of Leningrad, now New Petersburg, old soldiers carved resistance slogans into the walls beneath occupation posters.
They knew they would not see freedom return, but their small acts of defiance, their flickers of rebellion, became sparks that refused to die.
The occupiers responded with fear, mass arrests,
Public trials,
entire districts silenced overnight.
but repression only fed the hunger for truth.
Every empire fears its own reflection the moment when obedience turns to awakening. In France, the Mouvement Marquis waged a hidden war of sabotage.
Factories exploded. Train lines vanished into smoke.
In Prague, a network of priests smuggled burnt books disguised as hymnals to believers in underground cathedrals.
And in the heart of the Reich itself, an officer known only as Der Spiegel leaked intelligence to rebel cells, warning them of planned purges. Resistance was not a single movement. It was 1,000 small awakenings, scattered, fragile, but alive. They fought not to win a war, but to preserve the possibility that one day someone could.
In that world, courage had no medals, only consequences.
But resistance is a contagion, and like all contagions, it spreads unseen. And so the generations born in silence learned to speak again. By the late 1960s, rebellion had a pulse.
Cities once silent began to murmur. Art, literature, and memory long buried began to resurface. And with every whisper, the empire trembled. Because even in a world built on lies, truth waits patiently for the right moment to rise. The resistance may never have won a battle,
But it kept humanity from forgetting what freedom was. And in the darkness before dawn,
that was enough.
next we face the final question.
Could the world ever rise again? The last part, the awakening, when history fights back.
If this story of silent defiance touched you, subscribe and join us in the final chapter, The Awakening.
Because even in the darkest timeline,
Humanity endures.
for decades, the world slept under iron skies. Generations born into obedience never knew another way.
But history, true history, is never buried forever. It begins quietly. A song hummed in a factory.
A word whispered in a classroom. A flag painted beneath the cover of night.
The year is 1971. Across Europe, protests erupt not for power, but for memory. The children of the Reich refused to salute. The children of the Empire refused to kneel.
It is not a battle of armies, but of truth against forgetting.
And once truth speaks even softly, the silence shatters.
In Paris, protesters chant the forbidden words of Libet. In Berlin, A student climbs the statue of the FHR and hangs a white banner across its chest. WII sind free Jeberin. We were born free. The old guard calls it chaos. The people call it awakening. Across Asia, the rising sun falters. Workers in Shanghai strike, refusing imperial quotas. In Seoul, crowds defy soldiers with nothing but paper cranes, symbols of peace, fluttering against rifles.
Empires crumble not when they are defeated, but when they are doubted. By the 1980s, the whispers have become a roar. The resistance has no leader, only memory. No nation, only the shared ache for truth. The world begins to remember itself.
Names once erased are spoken again, and Warsaw, Sophie, heroes not of conquest, but of conscience. The monuments of tyranny begin to fall, one by one, not by bombs,
but by hands, by the will to say, no more, and so, after 40 years of darkness, the light returns.
But the scars remain. The children of the empire inherit not guilt, but the burden of remembrance.
They rebuild not with pride, but with humility.
For history is not a straight line.
It bends, it breaks, it bleeds,
but always it finds its way back to truth. In this alternate world, as in our own, the lesson is the same. Freedom, once lost, must be fought for again and again.
It is not inherited. It is earned in every act of courage, every whispered truth, every refusal to obey the lie.
The world awakens, and history, long silenced, finally speaks again. And that is how the story ends. Not with victory, but with remembrance. Because even in the darkest timelines, humanity always finds the dawn. If this journey through the darkest alternate history moved you, subscribe to keep exploring the hidden, what IFS of our past. Because understanding what could have been reminds us why what did happen matters. To remember is to resist.